What happens when humans decide to build where nature will clearly say, no, don't do that? Join me. We're going to count down 15 amazing structures that were built in impossible locations. Number 15. The Cliffside Hanging Monasteries in Greece. In the mountains of Greece, where stone pillars rise from the earth like a petrified titan, a handful of ancient monasteries cling to the edges of these cliffs. Some are suspended 1,200 feet above the valley floor. These are the monasteries of Meteora, a name that means suspended in the air, and they're among the most improbable constructions ever achieved by humans. Its origins begin long before the first stones were laid. The rock columns that define the landscape are the result of over 60 million years of geological force. Initially, they were formed by sedimentary deposits on an ancient river delta, and then tectonic shifts and millions of years of erosion sculpted these natural towers into the wonders we see today. Some of them are over 400 meters tall. Now, building monasteries on top of these required courage, determination, and tremendous ingenuity. With no modern tools like cranes or scaffolding, even helicopters, every brick, wooden beam, and slate tile had to be hauled up manually. At first, the only way up was by rope ladders and nets. Monks and materials alike were hauled up to cliffs in baskets and suspended from winches. As time passed, the monasteries began to solidify both physically and spiritually. At its height, it was home to 24 individual monasteries. Each one was a self-sustaining sanctuary. They weren't just spiritual centers, they became bastions of Greek culture and learning during the Ottoman occupation. Monks hid manuscripts, they taught clandestine lessons, and preserved sacred traditions. All of this happened hundreds of feet above the ground, often shrouded in fog, and that made them seem like floating fortresses from another world. Some might see Meteora and ask, why not build in the valley? Why subject yourself to such hardship? But that's precisely the point. For the monks who came here, hardship wasn't a side effect, it was the goal. Every ounce of sweat and fear brought them closer to God. La Rinconada mining settlement in Peru. In the Peruvian Andes, at an elevation of 16,732 feet, 5,100 meters, is the highest permanent human settlement on Earth, La Rinconada. Unlike the monasteries of Meteora, this is no peaceful refuge. It is a chaotic, freezing, barely breathable outpost where 30,000 people live and work in conditions few would willingly endure. At its heart is a gold mine, and around it sprawls a labyrinth of shanty homes, makeshift markets, and dangerously improvised infrastructure. But what makes it impossible isn't just the altitude, it's the fact that a bustling community has managed to cling to survival in a place that punishes every breath. The oxygen levels up here are just 50 to 60% of that at sea level, causing chronic altitude sickness in many people, and temperatures rarely rise above freezing, and snow will fall even in the summer. There's no sewage system, barely any running water, and only patchy electricity. And the nearest paved road is hours away. Yet people come here in droves for one reason: gold. The nearby gold mine, operating under an informal system known as the Cachorrero, offers a unique and controversial arrangement. Miners work for 30 days without pay. On the 31st day, they're allowed to take home as much ore as they can carry. There's no guarantee it contains any gold, but there's always a chance. It's like a lottery, a brutal, physical, life-shortening lottery, but one that lures thousands from poorer regions of Peru, Bolivia, and beyond. And yet, people endure. Families raise children here, markets do business, churches hold services, and construction never really truly stops. It's a city that really shouldn't be possible, where the very idea of civilization seems to defy the laws of physiology and climate. But La Rinconada is a monument to human adaptability. They endure the impossible not for ideology or for faith, but for the slim hope of some prosperity. Number 13. The Kachki Pillar in Georgia. Rising 130 feet, the Kachki Pillar in western Georgia looks like a natural monolith someone forgot to remove after the world was flattened. This limestone pillar jutting straight up from a valley was once dismissed as inaccessible. Yet at its summit, clinging to the sky like a divine afterthought, sits a small chapel, a crypt, and the residence of a lone monk. To understand how impossible this structure really is, you have to grasp the geography. The Kachki Pillar isn't a gentle hilltop or a wide mesa, it's just a spike of rock, barely 40 square meters at its peak, roughly the size of a small apartment. Yet humans are not known for backing down from impractical aspirations, especially when the divine is involved. In the 4th century, early Christian hermits began settling in caves at the base of the pillar. Some of them speculated that the pillar had once been used by pre-Christian pagans, possibly for fertility rituals or nature worship. But by the 9th or 10th century, Orthodox monks had embraced the stone tower as a literal stairway to heaven and built what would become one of the world's most surreal monastic retreats on its peak. The hermit lifestyle at Kachki wasn't symbolic, it was absolute. For nearly a millennia, the summit was inhabited by men who wanted to remove themselves entirely from the temptations of society. They lived in isolation, sometimes for decades, receiving food and supplies via baskets on pulleys, and below the pillar, a support monastery formed, made up of monks who would send up food, help with repairs, and occasionally attempt a treacherous climb. The last known hermit to occupy the top before the site was abandoned was said to have lived there until the 1400s. After that, for centuries, the pillar remained untouched. The climb was too dangerous, and the structures at the top slowly decayed. Then, in the 1990s, a monk named Father Maxime made the impossible possible again. With a team of climbers and engineers, he led a project to restore the top of the pillar. Over years of painstaking work, they repaired the ancient chapel, added a small living space, and replaced the iron ladder bolted into the rock. A vertical ascent of nearly 150 feet with no safety rails and no platforms. Today, visitors come in from all over the world to see the pillar, but access to the top remains strictly limited. And that's what makes it so fascinating. It was never meant to impress, only to elevate. Number 12. The Ice Hotel in Sweden, a hotel that melts every year. In most parts of the world, building a hotel that melts into a puddle each year would be considered a failure. But in a tiny Swedish village just 200 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle, it's an entire business model. The Ice Hotel is constructed entirely out of snow and ice, rebuilt every winter in a process that's equal part architecture, performance art, and engineering. It's a hotel not meant to last, and yet it returns, year after year, more extravagant than before. Now, what makes the Ice Hotel such an impossible structure isn't just the raw material, it's the logistic nightmare of building something so elaborate and so temporary in one of the coldest and most remote corners in Europe. Each winter, around 5,000 tons of ice and 30,000 tons of snice, that's a mixture of snow and ice, are harvested from the nearby river. This ice isn't from a freezer, it's crystal clear, naturally formed and so pure it looks like glass. First, metal molds are used to create arches and hallways, then artists from around the world descend upon this place to sculpt the rooms. Each suite is individually designed, often featuring elaborate ice carvings, interactive installations, or intricate frozen furniture. Chandeliers hang from the ceilings made of frozen water. Even the glasses in the bar are made of ice. So the question begged is, why do this? Well, the answer is partly artistic, partly cultural, and partly economic. The town is home to only a few hundred permanent residents, and before the Ice Hotel was conceived in the late 1980s, it was a quiet, barely known fishing village. But today, it attracts tens of thousands of visitors each year, driving tourism and putting this Arctic outpost on the global map. Every iteration is different. One year might feature a suite carved to look like an underwater cathedral, another year the hallway may resemble a frozen jungle. There's no blueprints, only concepts and collaboration. The artists, often sculptors and designers from all over the world, have just a few weeks to transform blocks of ice into inhabitable installations. Staying at the Ice Hotel, though, is not for everybody. Guests sleep on beds that hover around -5 degrees Celsius, bathrooms are located in separate heated buildings, and it's more than an expedition than a vacation. But for those who make the journey, it's a chance to sleep inside a temporary dreamscape, a physical, walkable sculpture that exists only because someone dared to build where logic just said, no, don't do that. Number 11. The Trollsteig Visitor Center in Norway. In Norway's western mountains, there's a structure that looks less like a building and more like a shard of the landscape itself. It's balanced with impossible grace over a vertical cliffside, the Trollsteig Visitor Center. It's not just a viewpoint, it's a marriage of minimalist design and raw, untamable nature. The name Trollstigen, meaning Troll's Ladder, refers to a famous serpentine mountain road known for its dramatic switchbacks and waterfalls. It's part of the Norwegian Scenic Routes project, which blends infrastructure and nature to create unforgettable drives. but few stops along the route are as breathtaking or as unlikely as this one. The center was conceived with a philosophy called contextual minimalism. That means the building wasn't just placed in nature, it was grown from it. Its sharp-edged concrete volumes mirror the jagged cliffs around them. Corten steel panels weather naturally that blend in with the rust-red lichen on nearby boulders, and large panes of glass reflect the fjord below, while allowing visitors to peer straight down into the void. One of the coolest features is the cantilevered viewing platform. That's a walkway that juts straight out over the precipice. Standing on it, visitors look down on the twisting roads hundreds of feet below, with nothing but a steel railing between them and the drop. The platform doesn't just offer a view, it dares visitors to confront the verticality of nature. Inside the center is a cafe, gift shop, and exhibition hall, all restrained in their aesthetic to let the landscape dominate. Even the lighting is minimal, allowing fog, sunlight, and snow to become the true stars of the experience. And everything from the menu in the cafe to the textures of the walls is intended to remind you that you're not in a city, you're in the belly of the earth itself. But perhaps the most poetic detail, the building is designed to be overwhelmed. When the snow comes, the structure is buried. When the fog rolls in, it disappears. And when the wind howls, it groans like the cliffs around it. The Trollsteig Visitor Center doesn't defy its impossible location, it honors it. Number 10. The Tomok Reservoir. Imagine building a colossal artificial lake on the summit of a mountain. Not a natural crater or a bowl, but a man-made wall of concrete and stone forming a circular pool as wide as a football stadium. Now imagine filling it with over 1 billion gallons of water, all held in place by a thin rim, with nothing but gravity, engineering, and nerves standing between stability and catastrophe. This isn't a concept sketch or a science fiction. This is the Tomok Upper Reservoir, and it was very real. It still is, but it also once failed with terrifying consequences. Tomok Mountain, located in the Ozark Mountains in Missouri. It's the highest point in the state, a forested peak rising to about 1,770 feet. It's a beautiful place, but not where you'd expect to find an industrial megastructure. Yet in the 1960s, Union Electric Company decided to turn this mountain into the crown of a hydroelectric project. Their goal, store energy by pumping water up the mountain when demand was low, and then release it down through turbines to generate electricity when needed. This is called a pumped storage hydroelectric system. It's sort of a giant battery, and while the basic idea wasn't new, the scale and location were unprecedented. Unlike traditional dams that hold back rivers, the Tomok Upper Reservoir sat entirely above grade, like a bowl of water that's just placed on a table. Any breach in the wall would mean disaster. There was no natural barrier, no redundancy, and in 2005, after decades of service, that disaster happened. On December 14th, a sensor failure caused the pumping system to continue filling the reservoir long after it should have stopped. The water level rose and rose until it overtopped the wall. The force of the overflow quickly eroded the embankment within minutes, and the wall gave way. A roaring wave of 1.3 billion gallons of water surged down the mountain. Trees were ripped from the ground, roads were obliterated. A nearby state park's ranger station, miles away, was flattened in seconds. But miraculously, no one died. The reservoir was gone, drained in just 25 minutes. To this day, the new reservoir remains atop the mountain like a massive infinity pool, a quiet, humming power source that few people know it's even there. It's not open to the public, but satellite images reveal its precision, a perfect oval of shimmering water carved into the summit of an artificial eye. Number 9. The Pyramid of Djoser. The Egyptian landscape is full of wonders, but among them is one structure that not only defied architectural convention, but also the very limits of its environment, the Pyramid of Djoser, also known as the Step Pyramid. Located at Saqqara just outside modern-day Cairo, it was the first of its kind, the earliest colossal stone building in Egypt, and perhaps the first large-scale cut stone construction in human history. But what makes this pyramid truly impossible is where and when it was built. It was constructed over 4,600 years ago during the 27th century BCE. At the time, Egypt lacked the architectural knowledge, tools, and organizational systems we might assume necessary to build something of this scale. There were no cranes, no iron tools, no wheels for hauling, and no precedent. Prior to Djoser's reign, kings were buried in low, flat mud brick tombs known as mastabas. Yet the architect of this new project, a man named Imhotep, had a radical vision, a series of mastabas stacked on top of each other rising towards the sky. It's estimated that over 330,000 cubic meters of stone was used in the construction of the pyramid and its surrounding complex, all of it moved by hand. The pyramid itself wasn't the only challenge. The entire complex had temples, shrines, courtyards, ceremonial walls, and underground tunnels that stretched for miles. One of those shafts descended 90 feet down into the earth, making it among the deepest tombs of its era. And yet, the whole thing almost didn't last. After millennia of neglect, earthquakes, and looting, the step pyramid nearly collapsed. By the early 21st century, parts of the interior had crumbled, sections of the ceilings had sagged dangerously, and conservationists warned that without intervention, this foundational monument of human history might collapse. Between 2006 and 2019, an ambitious restoration effort was undertaken. Engineers used inflatable air bladders, reinforced ceilings with carbon fiber rods, and reconstructed parts of the outer casing. Today, the pyramid stands strong once again. An example not just to the ingenuity of the ancient engineers, but also to the lengths modern ones have to go to preserve the impossible. Number 8. The Makelong Railway Market. So, in most cities, placing a market directly on an active railway track would be considered either a planning failure or an act of insanity. But in the town of Samut Sakram in Thailand, it's an everyday miracle. This railway market, often nicknamed Taladram Hup, which translates to the umbrella pulling down market, is built quite literally on the railway tracks, not next to them, not beside them, directly on top of them. And several times a day, a full-size passenger train plows through it at close to walking speed. The scene is almost surreal. As the horn of the oncoming train blares in the distance, vendors calmly begin folding their awnings and umbrellas back up. Produce, fish, meats, and goods are all pulled just inches away from the steel rails. Locals don't flinch, but tourists gasp. Seconds later, the train glides through the tight corridor, sometimes brushing past produce with mere centimeters to spare. Then, as soon as it's gone, the vendors casually roll their carts back into place. To accommodate the track, stall owners built these ingenious retractable awnings. Now, these umbrellas and tarps are mounted on rollers and hinges, allowing them to be pulled back in seconds. Produce is displayed in low baskets and plastic trays that sit flush with the ground, low enough that the train can pass right over them. The train passes through the market 4 times a day, 8 counting round trips. Each passage is accompanied by a symphony of whistles, bells, and shouted warnings. But despite the chaos, it is remarkably safe. Accidents are almost non-existent, and vendors know the train schedule to the minute. Some of them even joke that the railway is their best marketing tool. Tourists come for the train, stay for the produce. It represents a rare fusion of chaos, order, danger, and routine. What should be a constant disruption has become an orchestrated dance. A few minutes of synchronized movement 4 times a day that allows 2 entirely different systems to coexist. In any other place, a train and a market would be in direct conflict. Here, they've made peace, and it works. Moving on to number 7, a stone fortress that rises from the sea, Mont Saint-Michel. Off the coast of Normandy in France, there's an island that seems to defy geography and time. Rising abruptly from the tidal flats like a fortress summoned from legend, Mont Saint-Michel is a medieval abbey, monastery, and fortified town, all stacked vertically on a rocky outcrop, one that's completely surrounded by the sea at high tide. This isn't a movie set, it's real, and it's been standing for over 1,000 years. Building anything here was a challenge. Building what eventually became a full-scale monastery and military fortress, yeah, that was next-level ambition. The first structure, a small oratory, was built in the 8th century, but as Mont Saint-Michel grew in religious significance, so too did its architectural complexity. By the 11th century, Romanesque abbey churches and chapels had been constructed at the summit of the island. These were built directly into the granite rock. But the real challenge came in the following centuries when Gothic builders expanded the abbey vertically, stacking structures on top of each other like a stone wedding cake. The result was what came to be known as La Merveille, the Marvel. It featured cloisters, refectories, dormitories, and storage halls all layered into a vertical configuration. Supplies had to be brought in by cart or boat, often timed precisely with the tide. Food was grown in small rooftop gardens or shipped in from the mainland. Waste had to be disposed of carefully, as it would either poison the limited wells or be swept away by the tide. Every aspect of life here was dictated by the moon and the tides. Today, Mont Saint-Michel receives over 3 million annual visitors, and of course it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a symbol of human perseverance against nature. Pilgrims still climb its narrow streets, monks still hold services, and the Atlantic still crashes against its walls like it has for 1,000 years. Number 6. The Parrot Monastery. On the face of a vertical cliff 3,000 feet above the Paro Valley in Bhutan, the Parrot Monastery, often called the Tiger's Nest, is one of the most amazing religious structures in the world. From afar, it looks like it's almost hovering, defying both gravity and logic. But Takang is not only real, it's thriving. For centuries, monks have made this impossible place their home, meditating in silence at the edge of the sky. The construction of the monastery began in 1692. The undertaking was monumental. The sheer drop from the ledge on which the monastery was built is nearly vertical, almost 90-degree granite face. There were no cranes, no helicopters, no roads to deliver supplies. Stone, wood, and plaster all had to be hauled on the backs of laborers through forest and narrow footpaths. And even today, there's no vehicle access here. Visitors have to trek up steep switchbacks, traversing pine forests, rocky outcrops, and sheer trails carved into the mountain. The journey typically takes about 2 to 3 hours on foot and includes an elevation gain of nearly 2,000 feet. But perhaps the most dramatic moment in the monastery's recent history came in 1998, when a fire broke out and destroyed much of the structure. The blaze, likely started by an overturned butter lamp, raged on for hours before it could be extinguished, and by then many of the temple interiors had been reduced to ash. The government then launched a national campaign to restore the monastery, mobilizing architects, artists, and engineers to rebuild the complex to its exact former dimensions. It was painstaking work. But today, the Tiger's Nest stands not just as a monument to faith, but to persistence. A place where the physical ascent mirrors the metaphysical. In a world increasingly dominated by convenience and access, Parrot remains proudly difficult, proudly remote, and utterly unforgettable. Number 5. The Halley 6 Antarctic Research Station. Imagine trying to build a research station not just in the coldest place on the planet, but on a moving slab of ice that's slowly drifting towards the sea. Now, imagine that slab routinely experiences 100-mile-an-hour winds and temps below -60°C, with months of darkness. Yeah, that's the challenge faced by scientists and engineers at the Halley 6, the only modular, relocatable walking research station ever built. It's a bright orange caterpillar of a building that quite literally walks across Antarctica. Operated by the British Antarctic Survey, Halley 6 sits on the Brunt Ice Shelf, a floating platform of glacial ice that extends off the coast of the Antarctic mainland. Now, while most research stations are built on solid rock or anchored inland, Halley 6 rests on top of a creaking, cracking mass of ice that moves at a rate of 400 meters per year towards the Weddell Sea. In other words, it's on borrowed time, and everyone knows it. The logistics of building it were as extreme as the climate. Materials had to be shipped in by icebreaker to the edge of the Antarctic and hauled inland by sled convoys across dangerous crevasses. Every screw, panel, and bolt had to be designed for freezing conditions. Normal lubricants freeze solid here. Plastic shatter and metal contracts unpredictably. Construction took 4 Antarctic summers, each limited to a few months of relative daylight and bearable temperatures. And living at Halley 6 is no joke. For 9 months of the year, the station is cut off from the world. In winter, 14 or fewer people remain. Temps can drop to -60°C and the sun disappears entirely for 105 consecutive days. But maybe the most dramatic moment in Halley 6's history happened in 2017 when a massive crack known as the Halloween Crack began expanding across the Brunt Ice Shelf. Scientists feared that if the station remained in place, it would soon be stranded on an iceberg the size of a city. So they moved it, the entire station, 23 kilometers inland, module by module. It was the first time a major polar research station had been physically relocated to escape a natural hazard. But what makes Halley 6 truly the impossible structure isn't just that its hostile environment or the remoteness it's in, it's the very ground beneath it isn't really ground at all, it's ice, shifting, breaking, and melting, a surface that's seemingly inherently incompatible with permanent architecture. A building that walks to survive, a lab that floats over a frozen sea, Halley 6 isn't just a research station, it's proof that mobility can be the answer to impossibility. Number 4. The Sunken Church of Possi. In the Andes Mountains of Venezuela, in the state of Táchira, lies the eerie remains of a colonial church that spent decades submerged beneath the lake, only to rise again during times of drought like a ghost from the past. The Church of Possi is a half-submerged ruin, and that's all that remains of a village that once thrived in the highlands here, before the entire community was flooded to make way for a hydroelectric dam. The story begins in early 1980s when the Venezuelan government undertook the construction of the Urbante Caparo hydroelectric complex. To power this system, several valleys had to be flooded, including the one where the town of Potosí had stood since the 1800s. Residents were relocated, their homes evacuated, and in 1985, the reservoir waters rose, swallowing the village whole. Potosí disappeared beneath 30 meters, about 100 feet of water, leaving only the top of the town's stone church tower visible. For decades, the lake was calm, and then the town was forgotten, until something extraordinary happened. In 2008, Venezuela experienced a severe drought, and the reservoir levels dropped dramatically. Slowly, the ghostly steeple of Potosí's church began to rise from the water, followed by its upper walls, its arched windows, and finally its entire facade. Photos of the moment went viral across Latin America, a town literally resurfacing from the past. In the years when rainfall is abundant, the church vanishes again, but when drought returns, as it has multiple times since 2010, the building reemerges. Locals make pilgrimage, some light candles, others take photos. And interestingly, it's the reappearance of the church has also led to debates over the future of water management in the region. Some argue that the hydroelectric system is outdated and inefficient. Conservationists warn that exposing the structure repeatedly to air and water will eventually cause it to crumble, but so far it endures. It's a place literally built in an impossible location, not above the clouds or in a crevice, but beneath a lake that swallows and spits it out at will. And unlike many structures on this list, its continued existence is entirely at the mercy of nature, not man's will. Number 3. A tiny cabin perched on a rock, the Drina River House. In the Balkans, straddling the border between Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina, a solitary wooden cabin stands defiantly on top of a rock in the middle of a river. With no bridge, no dock, and no visible path to its door, it seems more like a dreamscape than a real functioning structure. And yet, for more than 50 years, the Drina River House has weathered floods and ice storms. The story of this improbable little house begins in 1968 when a group of local Serbian teenagers decided they needed a resting spot in the middle of their favorite swimming river near the town of Bajina Bašta. The rock, battered smooth by centuries of water flow, had long served as a natural diving and sunbathing platform. But one summer, the boys decided to take it a step further. They would build a house on it. The logistics were, to put it mildly, insane. With no crane or access ramp, they had to transport all the materials by kayak and small boats. Then they hoisted it onto the rock by hand. No part of the construction process was easy, and no one was being paid. This was a purely labor of obsession. The rock it rests on is constantly being battered by water, and in spring, snowmelt from the mountains turns the Drina into a torrent. But its fame grew internationally after a photograph taken by Hungarian photographer Irene Becker was published in the National Geographic in 2012. Suddenly, the world took notice. Tourists began arriving by the busload to photograph it from the shore, and travel blogs declared it the most isolated house on Earth. It even became a metaphor in regional political cartoons, representing the idea of standing firm in turbulent times. And each time the water rises and the world watches to see if it will finally be swept away, the house quietly endures, daring nature to try again. Number 2. A city inside of a wall, the Cliff Palace of Mesa Verde. High above the canyon floor in the mesas of southwestern Colorado, the ancient ancestral Puebloans did something few civilizations have dared before or since. They built an entire city inside of a cliff. Today it's known as Cliff Palace. This sprawling stone settlement was constructed into a natural alcove in the rock face of Mesa Verde. It is invisible from above, sheltered from the sun, and nearly impossible to access from below. But what makes this place so remarkable and so impossible isn't just where it was built, but how, why, and when. It was constructed between 1190 and 1260 CE. Cliff Palace consists of over 150 rooms and 23 ceremonial kivas. Those are subterranean round rooms used for rituals. It could have housed up to 100 people, likely elite members of the Puebloan society, and the structure is tucked into a massive sandstone alcove about 90 feet deep and 60 feet high. Access to the site is limited to footpaths, rope ladders, and hand and toe holes carved into the vertical rock, and to enter or exit the village, you have to scale the cliff face. Families cooked, slept, raised children, and held ceremonies all within this hanging village. But why build it in such a precarious spot? Scholars suggest multiple reasons. The alcove provided natural insulation, cooler in the summer, warmer in the winter. The elevation offered protection from enemies and animals, and the southern exposure captured valuable sunlight during the colder months. It was a brilliant adaptation to a challenging environment. Today, Cliff Palace is known as the crown jewel of Mesa Verde National Park, a UNESCO World Heritage Site visited by hundreds of thousands each year. Only small groups are now allowed on guided tours. The fragile structures have to be protected from foot traffic, moisture, and vibration. Not because it was designed with permanence in mind, but because its builders understood the land intimately. They knew where the wind would blow, where the rock would hold, and how to turn a vertical cliff into a horizontal world. It's not just architecture, it's magic made real. Number 1. The Potala Palace, a sacred fortress in the sky. At more than 12,000 feet above sea level in the remote oxygen-starved city of Lhasa in Tibet, the Potala Palace rises like a myth that's carved into the mountains. It clings to the side of Marpori, or Red Hill, like a crown to a sacred king. But to truly grasp why the Potala Palace tops this list, why it's the most important structure of them all, you have to explore its improbable origins, extraordinary construction, life under harsh political change, and the quiet, trembling balance it now maintains. To begin with, Lhasa is not a forgiving place to build anything, let alone a megastructure. Sitting at an altitude of roughly 3,700 meters or 12,000 feet, the Tibetan Plateau is the highest region on Earth. The air here contains 30 to 40% less oxygen than that at sea level. Then there's the terrain. This palace isn't built on a conventional flat plain. It's constructed on top of a sharp hill, Marpori, with steep cliffs and loose shale. In today's world, you'd need heavy drilling equipment, reinforced concrete pilings, and computer modeling foundation plans. In the 7th century, the era of Potala's beginnings, all of this had to be done by intuition, measurement, and faith. Over the centuries, the original structure was expanded and improved, but the version now of the Potala Palace that still stands began under the rule of the 5th Dalai Lama in the 1600s. A combination of monasteries, fortress, governmental headquarters, and spiritual beacon. He envisioned the Potala not only as a residence, but as the physical embodiment of Tibetan Buddhist theocracy. So how does one build a place in the sky without machines? Well, the answer is barely. The stones used to build it were quarried miles away and transported on the backs of men and mules. The roofs were covered in gold-plated bronze tiles, not for extravagance, but to reflect the sunlight and prevent snow accumulation. Inside, the palace is a maze. The White Palace served as the administrative center and winter residence of the Dalai Lama, while the Red Palace at the core is entirely devoted to religious study and prayer. Every part of the Potala Palace was designed to endure not just time, but the forces of nature. And the complex was designed in such a way that even if sections collapsed, which some did in minor seismic events, the core would remain intact. Remarkably, the Potala survived partly due to inventions by high-ranking Chinese officials who recognized its historical value, and partly because of the international pressure. But preservation comes with a price. Over the years, the influx of tourists, environmental damage, and urban development in Lhasa have all posed threats to the place. And yet, it endures. In 1994, it was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, cementing its global importance. Restoration efforts continue, often in secret, sometimes in cooperation with international experts. But the structure itself, the 1,000-year-old soul of Tibetan sovereignty, still sits atop the Red Hill, radiating impossible beauty, layered with grief, pride, and quiet power.